Hello there, and welcome to this video. This is a Philosophy Sunday video. Now, I think at some point last year, I did a video and I happened to have a British flag in the background. And this elicited a certain response from certain people who watch this channel, who were quite horrified that I had done this. And there was a very strange situations where Americans of all sorts of different political backgrounds were messaging me saying, why are people having a go about you having a British flag up in Britain in your home? And the thing that was interesting is that the flag that I had up in the background, I'd stuck it up on the wall because my daughter wanted it to go on the wall. And the reason is because she'd become at that time very interested in some of the sort of mod groups, especially Paul Weller and the Jam. And in doing so, you know, she wanted to have some that sort of thing going on. And it was just interesting how triggered people were. Now, for me, when I see that sort of triggering, it's because I think they are in a mindset that has come from the 1960s. That the 1960s, there was a sort of, that culturally there was a shift. And I really want to talk about that shift. And I want to talk about an aspect of that shift, which I think now is sort of falling apart. And that is why certain elements find it so offensive that I could even sit here with such a thing draped over my shoulders, because for them it does not represent what it represents to me. And there doesn't seem to be any space in their worldview to see that this may mean something completely different to me. There doesn't seem to be a tolerance in my opinion being different, perhaps. There's just an assumption that I must be right-wing, racist, pro-colonialism and imperialism, you know, far-right. That's the assumptions when people see me draped like this. These ideas come from the 1960s, and I think there's a generation now that are old, middle-aged, middle class, quite successful, who still hold on to these 1960s values as their sort of moral barometer. Now, why would I want to do this video? There's a couple of things that motivated this. Firstly, my drum hero, I will take this off now because I don't want to sit with it on the whole of my shoulders, so we'll do that. And I will throw it casually over my shoulder to show I'm not so enamoured by the flag that I can't, you know, throw it around a little bit. It is just a piece of cloth to me in the end. It hasn't landed on the light, has it? And it's not going to cause... Oh, it's landed on my cowbell on my drum kit. That's quite fortuitous, I would say. So, because I know where it is. So, my drum hero, Vinnie Colaiuta, recently appeared on a YouTube channel. And this YouTube channel is called The War Against Beauty. And this YouTube channel is not a music channel. It's got this sort of quite strange lady that's walking around with a little black bob, looking like that woman out of what was the group? What was the group we did? Breakout in the UK. Breakout, you've got to try. You gotta find a way. What you wanna say? Swing Out Sister, right? Swing Out Sister. Now they had taken their image from Louise Brooks, who was a sort of cult film star in the 1920s, silent film star with the little black bob, you know. Betty Boop, had that sort of look as well. And this lady has got this look, and she walks around going on about all the modern depraved art, Now, I don't like that, because she says things about modern art, and I thought, I got a degree in fine art. I know about art. Everything she says is not true. She doesn't seem to understand what artists do. And if we were to take her conservative view that anything that she thinks is ugly, right, should be sort of banned or criticised, really strikes at the very heart of what art does, which is negotiate what we think is beautiful. That's the whole point. And once you put the kibosh on that negotiation, you move towards an intolerant, fascistic society. Now, of course, these ideas that I just espoused are also these 1960s ideas. So what happened in the 1960s, and what does rock and roll represent, and what is happening to it now as that era goes off into history, and all the values that were really created in the 1960s are falling apart as they atrophy into late middle age in the minds of certain people who are now holding on to these ideas as though there's some sort of religious gospel that can't be changed, What do you mean, Andy, can't be changed? Well, there seems to be a generation out there of my age, certain demographic of, I would say, educated people they're not from the 60s. The people from the 1960s are now incredibly old. They're dying, right? There's a certain reverence that I grew up with old people, because we knew they'd fought in the war and that they'd been involved in hardship. But these old people who are dying at the moment, we don't need to feel sorry for them, because all they did was get stoned and listen to Pink Floyd. They had a different life. You have to understand this. Right? There's nothing that we don't have to worry about them. They were okay. They weren't like the generation before. No, I'm talking about people who grew up in the sort of dogma of this period, where the excesses of progressive rock and the excesses of jazz rock were seen as being somehow bourgeois. And there was a sort of drawing in through punk and a certain idea that I have rallied against on this channel continually. The idea that you've got to be working class, that you have to be uneducated musically, that the best guitar players are the ones who play emotionally, and all those sort of ideas of what creates great music and why, a band like Joy Division is held in higher critical esteem than, say, the Bee Gees, when, to all intents and purposes, in terms of aesthetics, musical aesthetics, the Bee Gees knocked Joy Division into a cocked hat. And the people who are wincing at that at the moment are those people of a certain generation, my generation, who are going, no, the Joy Division are geniuses and you don't understand it because they represent something. And what do they represent? What do they represent? They represent a sort of counterculturalism that was mapped and defined in a different way in the early 80s. And those people who have now gone on to do very, very well, in the same way as Frank Zappa, described the hippies turning into yuppies, these post-punk types have turned into the sort of Guardian reading, green voting lefties that I can be sort of quite critical on this channel. But I'm very aware that when I am critical, as a friend pointed out, they say they assuming you have a position which you haven't got. And those of you who are aware of the position that I have got don't quite know where I'm coming from. My position is coming from the studying of music and music history and the cultural aspects of that, as well as the technical aspects of that, which I think have been devalued through this sort of working class, we've got to listen to those at the bottom of the pile, philosophy, which is unquestioned. It's not it's a bad philosophy, it's just unquestioned. What am I talking about on this video? What am I really coming from? Because really, here I am, 10 minutes in, there's your introduction done. I've sort of talked around the subject. Now I need to bring some more structure into it. So, when we see the Titanic sailing off, you see, I have to make this up, you see. I have to just have a quick stop and then go, right, where are we going to start? And you have to launch your ideas off like you have just pushed a boat out and see where it's going to go. And so that image of the Titanic sailing off in 1912 really is the embodiment of the sort of Victorian confidence that industry can do anything. And now we've got this thing that is invincible. We have solved all the problems, fate, all the sort of dark, swirling masses of chaos. They could have no effect on us because we have created the Titanic, a titan. And there goes toddling across, hits nature in a way it wasn't expected. And this huge disaster happens. And 1912 could be seen as the end of the Victorian era. The world is then thrown into turmoil. We go through a period of time which is very similar to what we're going through now. There was wars, there was a flu epidemic, there's all sorts of change and happenings and all sorts of stuff going on. And the foundations of reality shift. It's what I call an epochal shift. The epoch shifts. And by the time we've gone to the 1920s, it's all different. We've got the fascistic futurists, doing paintings of driving around in silver cars too fast. We have the jazz age, which seems to not be about what Louis Armstrong's doing. Louis Armstrong's music seems to embody this idea of girls in very short skirts doing dances on the top of aeroplanes. All the blues is emulating trains, and the trains go across the countryside. They're spreading this out. The radio's there. We go into the era of modernity in the 1920s. And there's a sort of nihilist in the 1920s, a nihilist hedonism, which we could see also exists in the 1960s. But the ideas that emerged out of the 1920s culturally is this idea of mass production. It's different to industry. This is the idea that there is going to be a future, and it's going to be like the Jetsons, and we're going to be riding around in hovercrafts, and we're going to be in silver suits, and we're going to eat out of a tube, and our dogs will be robot dogs. All that idea of this sort of utopian, futuristic future, the Western idea of utopia, not the sort of Marxist communist utopia that's going on in Russia and China at the same time. No, this is a Western capitalist future where you don't have to do any work. Everything's going to be provided for you. It's all wonderful, and that emerges it. And to play a part in that, you have to be a cog in the machine. And this sort of echoes a sort of Victorian idea of conforming, acting like your parents, going down the path of your parents, and all this type of stuff. Now, the chaos that ensues in the 1910s to 1920s, that chaos carries on. It never really quite goes away. We have the Depression in the 1930s, and then we have the Second World War, which is basically the First World War being finished off. And it's a huge calamity within humanity. And as the gas chambers are opened up and we see what human beings are capable of, and Western Europeans are capable of, we shift. The United Nations is formed, and Europe consolidates. We can never have this happen again. And we sit under the threat, but also safety of the atomic bomb as well through this age. The 1950s, with the dawning of rock and roll, can be seen as this atomic age, really. It's very interesting what's going on culturally in there. Here in the UK, we're just decimated by what happened in the war. And so music making goes sort of to like a kitchen sink level with skiffle. This is now you can make music even though you can't afford an instrument, and that's a really big thing. But whereas in the States, teenagers suddenly come into their own wealth. The population's depleted, especially the male end of it after the war. People find that there's lots of jobs. My parents said, that if you wanted a week off, you could just, at the end of the 1950s, they could just knock their job on the head on the Friday, have a week off, and then go and get another job on that following Monday when they wanted to go back to work. It's very interesting. So the teenager is born, and these teenagers, they're rebellious, they're revolutionary. Now, where does rebelliousness comes from? It comes from this sort of utopian idea that you could create a new world, whether it's, the French lopping off the aristocracy's heads at in the French Revolution, to Marx's ideas of creating a sort of workers' utopia. There's always been this idea of the utopia. It could be the sort of nationalistic Nazi utopia, where all the sort of bad elements in society have been got rid of, leaving just the good elements. I'm always very distrustful of utopias. But in the 1960s, as this generation grow up and they go into that, they don't want what their parents wanted for them. They want something else. And they look at what their parents' generation have done. They look at the Second World War. They look at all the crimes and atrocities. They look at the gas chamber. And they go, we're not going to do this. We are going to create an age which is, their utopia is a utopia of sort of almost like a Dionysian utopia. Also it's like a sort of Rousseau. There's a French philosopher, Rousseau, who had this idea that we are fallen from this noble savage, that if only we could get back to nature, since somehow getting back to nature, we would be able to find our true selves, and a community would emerge out of that. And that really becomes the great 1960s cultural shift. It's a whole bunch of people who are deliberately rebelling against what the destiny was for them. It's not revolutionary like people having an idea. It's not like Lenin coming in and it's and enacting a sort of communist revolution. It's not that type. This is a different type of revolution. But there is a revolution that happens in the West in the 1960s, and it's this. It's almost like you could call it the Aquarian Revolution. It's the Woodstock Revolution, that if we just were to let everything just hang out, if we were to embrace anarchism, hedonism, if we were to embrace all these things and throw off all these strictures that are holding everybody down, because in the end, we're there, the Americans are going out fighting in Vietnam. I've got no interest in fighting the Vietnamese. Let's deal with us, Women have been put down, black people have been put down, gay people have been put down, trans people have been put down, all these different identity groups have been put down, and we need to free ourselves from all these strictures. And we start to look at the way that the Western capitalism works. Why do we need money? Now, it's, of course, the symptom of a society which is very wealthy, right? It's almost like if you were to look at Maslow and look at the hierarchy of needs, that self-actualization, when it comes to sort of politics, can be seen as evidenced in this idea of that we have got to this, but we're at the top of the tree. So now at the top of the tree, we can criticize the being at the top of the tree. So Western liberal democracies become the evildoers. They want to stick it to the man. This generation are not going to be what went before. 1967, The Graduate comes out right on the cusp of rock music developing. And it's a story of a guy that's been at university, he's done what his parents say, and he comes home. When he comes home, he hits an existential crisis, and the only way to express how he feels is by having it away with an older woman, or sitting at the bottom of a swimming pool being a bit depressed. All these things are apparent in the 1960s. Now, as much as we had in the 1920s, where in the West we had this sort of jazz age depravity, and we have to remember that oh, come on. Why is this not charging? You should be charging, shouldn't you? Bloody camera. Where was I? This camera's going to run out of power any minute. I don't know whether this will be in the video or not. I'll have to do some editing now because I'm most likely going to have to stop and start again when it runs out. We're going up to 20 minutes at the moment, so you might have to edit this bit out. But I will go on until the camera runs out. That's the best way of doing it. And I was in a flow then. And what was I talking about, Andy? Where were you with this? You were digging your hole. You were digging that hole that the lefties don't like you digging. You hadn't got quite to the point where you come out the other side. So, you got to negotiate that. Freedom! It's all about letting it hang out. It's all about throwing off all the restrictions that society had put on us. And if we could do that, the anarchism of that would create its own new world. Now, of course, this is nonsense and it never could ever work. But for young people, it was a very exciting and motivating idea for art. And so the art form that becomes preeminent is not the art form that had existed in the 1950s, which was cinema. Right, that's the overarching art form of modernity. If you take modernity as being from 1912 to say 1962, that's that 50-year period. The cinema is the dominant art form. There's always a dominant art form in every single, movement or epochal shift. This postmodern, to use the term in its true sense, era is all about. It's all about a sort of anarchistic embracing of sort of the inherent beauty that is in everybody. And it's about letting that shine forth. By the end of the 1960s, the artistically and culturally, we start to see the cracks in this idea. This utopia doesn't quite work out. And this famously, that is represented in sort of music cultural history with the stabbing of that poor bloke at the front of the stage while the Rolling Stones are playing at Altman, to their version of Woodstock. But it can be seen in a whole host of different areas. I mean, like the Manson murders would be another example of the cracks in this. And the fact that you can move towards chaos sometimes, and creatively it can be very exciting. And the move towards chaos, actually, the most positive thing that came out of it was the embracing of alternative voices. What have the poor got to say? You know, maybe we should be listening to the poor, the working class. That can be seen in the sort of kitchen sink dramas of the British film at the end of the 1950s, early 1960s. What do black people think? And that we can see is that turn to sort of the truth and authenticity of 1930s blues musicians, itinerant blues musicians that were not only black but itinerant. And in going and listening to those early blues tunes, not only did you have this sort of spiritualism and a spirituality which pointed to a sort of engagement with a higher power, but also it had the other foot in the reality, the visceral reality of being a human being when you're at the bottom of the pile. Women, gay people, all the different identity groups, they all get a voice. And we see the beginning of the civil rights movement. And this is a very important aspect of the rock and roll era. And as these ideas start to crack, and we see within the realms of jazz, rock and prog and all the music we like here in the early 70s, there's a certain power enacted in those bands. There's a certain not power, there's a certain display of privilege in the prog bands and the jazz rock fusion bands. It starts to become very elitist. Now, originally, when we looked at people like Jim Morrison and then Jimi Hendrix, there was a Nietzschean aspect of them where they were like supermen almost, standing there as truth-sayers, like Zarathustra coming down from the mountain and spouting truth in a virtuoso way, and these people you had to hallow down. And then that sort of display of self-expression became too much for the more revolutionary end of this mindset. So the advent of punk, the division of punk as being the sort of revolutionary countercultural aspect of popular music, and then the sort of pushing over to pure hedonism just went to the disco era, and they got no interest in utopias or new visions. They just want to have a good time. And those two movements, disco and punk, sort of fracture music like this. And to be serious by the 1980s is to be left-wing. We have the red wedge over in the UK at this point. The musicians, millionaires that they are, capitalists that they are, they still want to trade in this idea that they are on a mission, a sort of a Christ-like mission to come and save the world. And the early rock stars like Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison, they had no interest in saving the world. They just wanted to blow your mind. John McLaughlin, the Mavish Duck Show, he wanted to change you in here spiritually. He wasn't interested in what was going on in the real world. But in the 1980s, if you were seen as being critically worthy, you were left-wing and you were helping people out there that were less privileged than you. And this comes to a head with the great post-punk Bob Geldof wanting to save the Africans in America. It's like the civil rights movement times 10. We're not just going to save black people, we're going to save African people who are starving to death because of the sort of colonial ways of, white Europeans. We're going to appease ourselves by doing this. The civil rights movement had changed, and by the 1980s we were getting a much more sort of separatist, Marcus Garvey, FBA, Nation of Islam view of African American music, which was separatist basically. And I don't agree with separatists. I'm not a fan of the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not a fan of people that believe that people can't get on with each other. I believe they can. But those who think we can't and we all have to go and decamp into our separate tribes, that starts to emerge. And we see that in the sort of edginess that surrounds hip hop and rap. And as rap moves from a novelty music to a serious music, we can see that these ideas that were embryonic in the 1960s are now sort of coalescing. They're becoming much more rigid in terms of what they represent. And what's interesting is that creatively, we see at this time musicians who have those aspects, not the musical aspects of genius, not the ability to listen to the Beatles and go, whoa, this is incredible musical stuff. That doesn't matter so much. What matters now is that you are showing your sort of revolutionary, leftist, identitarian worthiness is what makes you great. And you have to remember that in the early 90s, as we approach that, Nirvana and then Rage Against the Machine or Public Enemy or NWA, all of these are still countercultural. The mainstream hasn't moved over here. That generation that are controlling the media, they haven't moved to that yet. And so rock and roll is still able, and I use rock and roll in a really wide sense, it is still able to see itself as being countercultural. Now, the thing that I find fascinating in all of this is underlying the whole of rock and roll history is the idea of the star being born, the idea that there are these elites and they exist in this counter world, this Mount Olympus of.
And at that point, the battery on my camera ran out, and I was in mid-flow there. I watched the video back. I filmed that on Saturday. It's now Monday morning. On Saturday, I really wasn't feeling well at all. I ended up going back to bed. I was grumpy, not feeling great. I still feel a bit rough, but nowhere near as bad as I felt on Monday. And I wasn't getting to the point, which is the usual for me. I never get to the bloody point. And so I thought what I'm going to do is jump in here and pull this video back on track, right? Because this was motivated by, as I said at the beginning, this interview that Vinnie Colaiuta had done with this woman that looked like Louise Brooks, and where they discussed the depravity of modern art. Well, the depravity of which they speak is the outcome of the cultural shift that happens in the 1960s. It's a rejection of so many different ideas, and it's an embrace of so many other ideas. And at the time, the moral good was contained in that viewpoint, to that generation. That's what's really important. But to the powers that be, to the generation before, it seemed horrendous as young people embraced anarchism, hedonism, all these types of things. They're taking drugs, they're not bothering to keep society together. And they thought the very fabric of society would break down. Now, what's very interesting to me is that when I look at this era we're in at the moment, we can see those two things are playing out. But what's interesting is that what is really the conservative, what the establishment is this touchy-feely identitarian leftism, which grew out of the 1960s and has become atrophied as time has gone on. So when my kids go to school, what the school teaches them is not what schools taught people in the 1950s. In the 1950s, you would have been taught a sort of modernist idea of order and duty and having to do certain things for society to be a citizen. Our schools and our colleges, our education systems, our media, they don't teach that. The nice way of being is what people would call the progressive, but it's not progressive because it stopped being progressive a long time ago. It has become the morality of the establishment. That's not to say these aren't good morals. There's a ton of good morals in the ideas that came out of the 1960s, but of course we could analyse the 1960s and see that there's still also a whole bunch of bad stuff that came out of it. So for example, yes, black people, America passed a whole bunch of laws to stop, there being racism in society, and the sort of equality acts that came in and in my country were brilliant. But the problem is that community then went straight into a heroin epidemic in the 1970s and then a crack epidemic. And because of this, perhaps if the black community in America had some of that, the values that it had before that movement, right? And this is to place no blame on the black community. It's the fact that everybody shifts morally, and once you have an identity-based morality, then you're always blaming the groups. The groups that are underprivileged are the ones that are in the right, just naturally, and the groups that have the power are in the wrong. And I would say what I've just outlined there is the central moral idea that underpins these ethics that come from the 1960s, which have now atrophied to the point where they can't be questioned. And so pop music, rock and roll, still, now it's such a part of the establishment, and because people who came up and joined the ranks of Mount Olympus are now old, right? Now they're old, so they're millionaires and they're old. They're part of the establishment. The establishment has become that leftist progressive viewpoint. And the true sort of countercultural, in the real essence of the word, is a whole bunch of different people. And what are they shouting for? Maybe to be more moral in a religious sense and follow a religion, you know, to be against other religions that oppose your religion, to believe in the idea of a sense of duty, to believe in your country and what it stands for. You know, I've just watched a video before I got in the car, which was, it was an awful AR YouTube video, but it was talking about a meeting that Clint Eastwood and John Wayne had in the early 1970s. Now, John Wayne, for the progressives, will be an awful character. He will seem like a racist, a curmudgeon, a reactionary, a Republican, all those things they hate. And when Clint Eastwood sort of walked onto his clothes set and upset him, then they had this conversation, they found some mutual ground apparently. But what's interesting is that Clint, he represented the American myth, but transplanted through the 1960s, which was self-critical. He wanted to turn around and go, no, America was built on violence on all sides. There's no good guys, right? That's the idea of the American Western. Whereas John Wayne represents the archetypical strong, good American who, despite his faults, right, because he always has a few faults, but always is on the side of good. And it's about the idea of good and bad. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because I think one of the biggest issues we have when we talk about, say, AI or downloading, or the fact that there's no real music anymore, all these things that everybody on YouTube is talking about, what nobody wants to deal with is our perception of the 1960s and how we have turned it into some sort of wondrous utopia, despite the list of negative things that it brings into society, right? So I think this happened in the 1980s, and the point I would the point I would draw the line under is The Doors by Oliver Stone. So Oliver Stone comes out, and he's very much a sort of leftist 1960s progressive mentality. And he starts to make films which are critical of the American way. And he starts to almost like map that 1960s experience onto a whole bunch of films. So the first film he makes is Salvador, which really explores American sort of geopolitical position, you know, critically. Then he makes Platoon, and this really points out the toxicity and terribleness of the Vietnam War. Then he does... at some point, he does Born on the 4th of July of How I Met, and he's sort of going through, knocking these things out. He makes Wall Street, which criticises sort of capitalism, place that in a certain place. And right in the middle of this, he makes this sort of fan film, this fan worship film about the Doors. And what that does is mythologise Jim Morrison. Now, I've watched quite a few interviews with Jim Morrison, and I've been interested in the Doors, and as a character to place yourself on to, he is almost like the embodiment of the Dionysian, the Rustra coming down from the mountain, isn't he? Jim Morrison is almost like the poster boy for that. He's the poster boy for the very thing we're talking about, right? But as a person, twat. Really? Right, you could see this, you know, just a bloke who like pouncing around in leather trousers, you know, chatting up the women, right, and spouting, you know, those sorts of types. They're lampooned. He's lampooned in the film Annie Hall, you know, when Woody Allen goes back with Diane Keaton, and they're sort of in this party in the past, and she walks around and shows us this bloke that he's talking to him, and he's spouting all this sort of touchy-feely, you know, at oneness, spiritual, you know, wild-eyed loner on the way to get hell type of character. We know exactly what that character is. People are still walking around trying to be that now. It's as though there's a whole generation of people who are now in middle age that are walking around dressing in their version of the countercultural cliche that emerged at the time when they were teenagers. And all of it is about virtue signaling in that. I'm doing it right now with this hat on. You know, I've got Danny Sapko's hat on. Why the hell am I wearing this hat for? You know, why is a man like me, why am I wearing this hat? You know, I should be wearing a cloth cap, or maybe some sort of Englishman's hat, not sort of some sort of American baseball hat that was appropriated by hip-hop culture. And that's what this is about. It's hip-hop culture. I ain't going to bloody wear it anymore. What the hell have I got it on for? You know, with my sort of Englishman's jumper that I've got on, you know, and my sort of Yeah, I mean, I'm an Englishman. What am I trying to do? Who am I trying to kid myself? No. The 1960s was a cultural shift. This whole video is very simple in its point. There was something incredible that emerged out of the 1960s. It was the idea that other people have voices and they are of value, and there are other ways of seeing beauty, and that is always the aesthetic shift that happens. And these aesthetic shifts, when they happen, create the whole of history, culture, everything. If you look at everything that comes in after the 1960s, it's because we shifted what we thought was beautiful. This is the real reason why I do this channel, to try and get this idea across. If that hadn't happened, if we hadn't become progressive in the 1960s, right, there could have well have been more wars, there could have been all sorts of things, that the whole world would have been different. But the world went a certain way. But with every shift like that, it has to be negotiated. And now we can look back, as that generation did in the 1960s, look back to what went before and be critical of it. But the trouble is, when you are critical of it, you will come up against the Pharisees, the people that will say, you cannot say that, it should not be said. Not engage with you, it should not be said. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, where that is coming from. My point is the 1960s, that sort of whole rock and roll aesthetic that emerged, which embodies a whole bunch of values, both good and bad, has atrophied. It's atrophied into something now that cannot be questioned. But the problem is, here we are in the middle of it as it breaks down. And because they will not budge, because they will not let their progressivism be questioned, and just be saying that, they will be sat there going, so what is Andy saying? He's not a progressive, right? I am a touchy-feely painter that became a rock and roll drummer. I went to art college. Can you understand what my life has been like and what my values are, right? And this is the thing I realised over the weekend. I think I've become ill in the last few days because I'm a very sensitive person. And there's a number of things happen, and I knew they got me down. It's talking to people who I like, and then politics emerges. And I start to say my opinion, and I think you need to shut up now, because if you carry on, this nice middle-class artsy-fartsy type of person that you like and you're talking to is going to react negative, because basically they haven't got a clue. They're just virtue signaling. You can't expect them to be intellectually in the zone that you are in, that I am in, that I've spent my life being in, being involved in community arts, being involved in philosophy, looking into cognitive science, how that relates to education, and being really interested in 20th century culture and how that works around music, right? I can't expect this person to be like that. They just do their normal life and they watch all the normal stuff, and they think that this person's a right-wing fascist, and they think that this person's toxic, and you know, they believe in systemic racism. They're not going to question it. And when you even question it, to turn around and say systemic racism, well, yeah, if there's a system that's got a rule that's racist, we have to get rid of that rule. We should be looking for all these rules. But once you've got rid of all the rules, which I'm pretty sure we have, where does the systemic racism reside? And then they start to come up with some ghosting machine Hegelian idea of some sort of embodied essentialist force which is linked to white supremacy. And I'm literally turning around going, well, this sounds a bit sort of woo-woo to me, that does. This thing that you can't really touch or know, but you say it exists. But not only do you say it exists, if somebody says it, well, questions it, you react like, oh my God, send that person, witch, burn the witch, right? And this, it came up a number of times over the last few days with people I like. And I started to see that I am not a 16-year-old kid who's getting into music and wants to pull the world down. I am not that. I am nearly 60 years old and I'm a part of the establishment. I'm conservative. And my gut reaction is to buy into all these progressive ideas, but I have an understanding of how this stuff works. And I've spent my life thinking about what art means and what it's. But I've got certain dogmas and ideologies that I believe. I'll tell you what they are. Firstly, right, freedom, privilege is freedom, and freedom is privilege. If someone can do what they want to do, they are free, which means you have to be tolerant of other forms of expression, and you have to really to have a society which has been able to get to that point where we are doing the best for everybody. You need to set everybody free, which means they can do what they want, right? And the rule is they just don't do anything that affects anybody else, all right? That's called liberalism. So I have that very strong ethically in me. The other ethic that I have, which I sort of won't budge against, is that art is more important than science, and that everything starts with art. Even our idea of what truth is starts with art, and there's no science without the consensus of what truth is, okay? And so I hold on to those very rigidly, which means I don't automatically agree with all the dogma of identity politics, which when I say identity politics, what I mean is the ethical and moral shift and what that represented in the 1960s. You see, when I put Facebook on and I see a contemporary artist like Paloma Faith, and of course she has lined up with the most left-wing party in my country at the moment, I do not see this as a countercultural figure pushing against the mainstream and risking their reputation for art. I don't see that at all. What I see is the establishment. Now, what's very interesting is this interview with Vinnie Colaiuta. It really is strange, and the woman he's discussing the depravity of modern art with, I disagree with everything she says. And I put a few things out to a couple of people I know, and there's sort of this idea came back, which was, well, Vinny's he's sort of gone down a rabbit hole. I assume it would be a far right rabbit hole, and that he's engaging in ideas that we should be worried about the actual context that it was says. Yeah, we're really worried about Vinny, and you know, a lot of friends are worried about Vinny. Shit. I shouldn't be talking about this. This is the whole bloody point, you see. As soon as you start rubbing up against the establishment, and that's what this is. This is the establishment. And as much as I you know, do I want to be a part of this? That's the big question, isn't it? Do I want to be a part of this establishment? I do these videos, and sometimes I'm trying to get into a zone where I can have a revelation in some way and get into a certain area. But my God, this is like counselling. It always is when I'm in the car. Yeah, this YouTube thing's getting big, and I'm coming up against the establishment, and I am just not that type of person. I truly am not. I know it. And I know for me to go forward, I'm going to have to get into an area which is going to be difficult for me. And I could just play the game by kowtowing to this ideology, this sort of millionaire progressive ideology, virtue signaling thing that I can see is there. I'm so aware of it. And the truth is, the reason why I couldn't really deal with it, and I still haven't dealt with this subject here, I still haven't dealt with what do we do about the ethical debt created in the 1960s and how that is embodied in the morality of rock and roll, where you can celebrate a Lemmy for having sex with loads of different women, for never settling down, for being drunk, for taking drugs. You know, we could celebrate Lemmy for that, because sex, drugs and rock and roll is one of the hallowed things. As long as you're not being racist, as long as you're not doing all those things, those are all terrible things. So Lemmy's troublesome not because of the stuff he did in his life. We should celebrate that, even though it's destructive, even though it's going to make your life worse. And that's exactly what morals are there for. No, that's not why we should be upset about Lemmy. We should be upset about Lemmy because he had an interest in Nazi memorabilia, and he would wear, iron crosses and things like that. Right? When this stuff atrophies, it's absolute idiocy. Now, I think that the new generation have no understanding of this. They've been indoctrinated through the education system to know these things are taboo. Right? But knowing young people as I do, even though they know they're taboo, they are still intelligent enough to question it and go, yeah, you're not allowed to say this stuff, but that's just the world we live in. We are back at square one. Right? And the young people, they will always push, some of them at least will always push to that revolutionary place. And so we have a situation where we had the hippies and freaks of the 1960s, now we've got the incels, the Andrew Tate fans, remembering those are two separate things, even though our establishment has put them together, right? Our establishment put those things together and then say, hate the kids that are like this, have no empathy for them, they are monsters. People, they are being twisted down a terrible way of thinking, and it will be them that bring society down, nobody else. It will be the incels that bring society down, And I'm sat here thinking, bloody hell, I like progressive rock. The only chance we've got of saving the future of progressive rock is to get in with the incels, right? They're the only people that are going to keep it going once we're all gone. Once us middle-aged prog fans are gone, who's going to keep prog going? The incels. Now, what I've done there is I've used humour to point fun at this, which is what I do on this channel. I poke fun at this. It doesn't mean I agree with the incels, right? It doesn't mean that I really think that all progressive wrong fans are incels. It's just a parody of a certain idea, right? But you can't do that anymore. You can't do this. I tell you something. This video's a strange one. It's in two parts. You had the first part where I was sort of ready and I was working, workmanlike in my studio up there that I'm looking at right now. And this second part where I reacted to what I'd said a couple of days later, and I tried to tie it all together, and I didn't tie it all together. What I did was realise something. Am I going to play the game with the bloody establishment? This new YouTube establishment that is now emerging, because of course there's a cachet in being a YouTuber, isn't it? I know that now. I can walk anywhere and say, what do you do? I'm a YouTuber. Wow, really? It's ridiculous. It's like saying you're a rock star, right? How many subscribers you got? Oh, I got 80,000. Really? Like that, 80,000 subscribers? What it must be like to be someone with 1 million subscribers, it must be rock star status. An establishment has emerged and they have their ways, and then there are other elements in that establishment, and there's these things going on. There is as though there's an old guard of my age group, and we have a certain moral point of view, but the youngsters are true punk. They are true punk. I think what's really shown this up is my recent friendship with both Rick Beato and Danny Sapko, because they're two different types of YouTubers. One's young and one's establishment. I'm establishment, I know that, and Rick's establishment. We come from that. Danny's a lot more edgier, right? And he'll get in there and really poke fun. So I watched a video of it last night, and he's saying all sorts of awful things about me, and I had to sit back and think, yeah, he's doing it because it's funny. And the reason why I'm getting niggled, because there is an element of truth in it. So can you just take it? Can't you just take it, Andy? Yeah, you can. And I sat there and take it out. All I ask is that anybody that disagrees with me, can't you just sit and take it and get away from being the bloody Pharisees, judging everybody and trying to shut everybody up? Because if you don't do that, the toxicity that will be unleashed will be terrifying. And I think it is being unleashed right now. Value art. Value the history of art. value music, value the history of music, right? Go back and look at what happened before and try and work out what happens in the future. See what great art did and see how it embraced people, not repelled them. See the way art is full of love and the way that it reaches out. And that's why the most important thing that came out of the 1960s was the Beatles. The peak of it was in whenever it was, 67, when they were singing All You Need Is Love, you know, to the whole world. Right? And that might be naive, but we should be naive. Ethics and morality should be naive. It shouldn't be some snotty lecturer trying to get inside the knickers of their students by quoting Jean-Paul Sartre or Foucault, you know, and pushing a whole bunch of ideology on people so they can go out and go, yeah, well, actually, Andy, you're wrong because it's science, you know. We have to find a way forward. If you think I'm a reactionary, far-right conservative, right, that upsets me because I'm not. And I'm going to say it now. I really wish I could go, I ain't bothered. They can say what I want. They're all a bunch of bloody idiots anyway, right? I wish I could say that, but I am upset by it, right? Because believe it or not, I really don't want to be a racist. I don't want to be punching down, if that's a thing, to bloody, you know, people who have a crap life because they're in a position that isn't as good as mine, you know. I mean, and I'm trying to put it in the words the way I would see it, whoever that is. And I am stressed up by this at the moment, right? I'm going to be straight with you, right? I am really stressed up, blackly stressed up, and I am suffering at the moment with this. This is the way I am, and I'm going to tell you it right now, because I know I am. I know I am. I am really upset by it all. I'm upset by it all at the moment. I'm a sensitive person. I have an artistic sort of mindset, I suppose, is the only way to describe it. Philosophy Sundays, where I can do this. This video at the end of it has got no real answers. I'm as confused as absolutely everybody. If you got anything from this, I am not here. It's like some oracle. I don't stand for anything, right? I'm sat here suffering. I couldn't get out of bed for the last couple of days. You know, I've had headaches. I haven't been able to breathe properly. I've had like diarrhea. The whole works has been going on. I'm thinking, have I got the COVID? What's wrong with me? But I know what it is. I know what it is. And it is the realization that if I artistically want to do what I want to do on my channel, it's going to invite hate from people who are so and you're going to say, don't bother if they're like that, Andy. If they're so intolerant that they're just going to call you names and things like that, you shouldn't have done YouTube, or why are you on here for? You'll see that there's certain nights over the last couple of weeks there haven't been videos. I always do a video every day. They haven't been coming out, or I've been having to like take a video where there's music in it and edit a new video to cover it, right? I'm in a strange place at the moment, and that's what this video is about. I'm in a strange place. Anybody that tries to push their moral beliefs on people because they think that their moral belief is just the right way of being, I can't stick them, because they infringe everybody's freedom. I am committed, as you will see on this channel, of trying to say to people, be creative, do what you want to do, don't worry about what anyone thinks, just get it out there. Right? Because that is the thing that is making most people unhappy, is that they can't express themselves. And when these people come along ready to jump on whatever, when they don't contribute anything creative to the world whatsoever, but they're so ready to jump on anybody else and go, heretic, witch, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be saying that, you shouldn't be like this, you know, to be the bloody John Wayne to the Clint Eastwood and go, what the hell are you coming on my set? I don't like your films. But the thing with John Wayne is, in that situation, even a bigot like him sat down with Clint Eastwood and they found common ground. And what was it? The common ground was the art. that even though they had their own interpretations of the Western still had a value, a central value to the American tale of what America is, right? And so I think this is what we have to do with rock and roll. We have to go back at what rock and roll is, and what rock and roll is. It's young people expressing their view of the world, unadulterated. It is not Paloma Faith sat next to Zach Polanski, you know, with his arm round him going, look, everybody, I'm one of the nice people. It's not that. And that's why our early rock and rollers seem so much more godlike. There's so much here. There is just so much here to deal with, right? And because of that, I'm not finished, and I'm going to carry on dealing with it on this channel, if you will let me. Thank you very much. And I will do all the videos and bring them here, and I will make sure that there's many top 10 videos of things I hate, with me doing comedy monologues where I lampoon a certain man of a certain age and how we are stuck in our ways and all that type of thing, and also lampoon those very people as well at the same time in a way that's very clever that not everybody gets, right? But brings the viewers in. I'm going to carry on doing that. But the truth is, what we're doing here is we are examining this legacy, right? And so we may have, as the sort of wiser elders in this, you know, thing, we may have something to say, right? And maybe the youngsters that are coming in, which are revolutionary, but will also look to us for an example of where to go, will be able to perhaps pick up a guitar still and make some music that has the power of the music that we're celebrating here, but in a way which actually says something important to the cultural epoch we are moving into. And I have a duty to do that as well, even if it upsets certain people that don't like the fact that they suddenly found out I didn't have the establishment view of what is right and wrong. Surprise, surprise, because you never have you, Andy? You never have.